Good afternoon. This is Yasir Atalan. I am the Deputy Director of the Futures Lab at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel with such a distinguished panelist on the topic on future of mediation in the age of AI, where we will discuss new approaches, new tools, and the new actors. Before I get to my guests here, I want to talk about that this public panel, I should mention this public panel is linked to the workshop that we as a CSIS Futures Lab holding in the Doha Forum on AI and mediation workshop, where we are going to be convening partners from mediating space, mediation, and the technology to increase the dialogue. So I want to talk about a couple trends in the conflict landscape that has been changing for a while. In the beginning, we should say that the conflicts are increasing significantly. There are currently 61 active state-based conflicts, according to the UCDP data. And this last year, there were 7 new conflict onsets. That means if this trend goes on, we are going to expect many more conflicts in the coming years. So that means there is now more need for mediation, now more need for the peace-building efforts. At the same time, the technology and digitalization has been already there, and the AI revolution is making it much more complicated. It's providing new venues for new threats in the conflict space. The malicious actors are sort of using these venues for providing disinformation, online hate speech, but at the same time, we are also seeing new weapons, like Ukraine war showed us the drones are now dominating warfare. So obviously, the nuclear proliferation is also on the way. So technology is kind of already shaping the conflict landscape. But at the same time, we aim for, with the tomorrow's session, that there is a chance that technology can support the mediation efforts as well. And the next is this emerging middle powers, the small states who are taking initiatives on the mediation space that are outside of the existing traditional mediation frameworks, who are involving it and right now shaping the regional orders and the global orders as well. And at the same time, the global narratives are all fragmented. We are living in an era where we have different justifications for peace and different motivations for the peacemaking. So we will try to cover all range of this in this one panel. That's why we have 5 panelists. So we will need to be very quick. I just want to introduce my guests quickly. On my left, Sheikh Nawaf Al-Thani, he is the President of Council on International Mediation. On his left is Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu. She is the Under Secretary General and High Representative for the Disarmament Affairs at the United Nations. And Galip Dalai, who is the co-director of Program on Global Orders at the Oxford University. He is also the Senior Consulting Fellow at the Chatham House. And Ivan Krasev is the chairman of the Center for Liberal Strategies in Sofia. And finally, Helena Puig-Leraouri, she is the co-founder of Build Up, and she is the advisor to the UN Mediation Support Unit. So I want to start from with the UN aspect. Ms. Izumi, I would like to start on how the UN has been adapting to this changing conflict landscape. How did it shape the current norms and how it evolved? Could you walk us through how the UN perspective as your role? Because you've been in the UN for a while and you led peacekeeping efforts in your previous role, and now with the disarmament affair.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. So in the first round, I will definitely focus on the sort of a global context and what you mentioned as a norm efforts that the UN is making. And then in the second round, maybe, go into much more about practical, pragmatic examples as well. Now, we have to remember that both the conflict landscape and also how peace is sought, both of them are being transformed by those technologies. And obviously, all sorts of new technologies, but in particular, artificial intelligence definitely demonstrating its transformative power in this context. The good news is that the UN and multilateral institutions are really starting to focus on the norm developments. Examine how these really rapid changes are impacting all sorts of the work that we do, especially in peace and security, but beyond that. And again, we need to remember that these artificial intelligence and technologies in general, they both offer positive benefits and it carries a lot of risks as well. So we need to understand both aspects. Now, at the UN, as I said, various intergovernmental processes are starting to really substantively discuss those elements. And that is also true for mediation and preventative diplomacy as well. Just to give you an example, of course, AI will be really helpful in situational analysis, contextual understandings, etc., but also raises concerns about biases, inherent biases, misuse of AI, and of course, erosion of trust in general in the society. Now, three things at the UN level in terms of norm development in general. Definitely momentum is growing to look at AI, how institutional and normative gaps are there, and how we should potentially fill those gaps and create more forward-looking responses. And this really amounts to everything. Of course, understanding the risks and then create the measures to mitigate risks, but all the way to potentially also starting substantive discussions on how to govern those technologies, AI in particular, before those technologies start to govern us. But the second point, very importantly, we need to really understand how the conflict landscape is being impacted. Of course, AI-generated misinformation, disinformation, interfering in elections in various democratic societies, causing violence in some instances, creating sudden escalation, undermining trust and undermining social cohesion, leading therefore to instability in the worst case scenario, creating violent situations. The third is more of a upstream norm areas that you mentioned, the norms related to a military use of AI potentially. The good news here is that the intergovernmental processes have started some time ago, whether that is in the lethal autonomous weapon systems discussions that have been taking place already several years, now reaching to the level almost of a negotiation of some sort of a protocol legally binding. AI, more in general in the military domain, is starting. We will have informal consultations on the general application of artificial intelligence in the military domain, meaning how AI is being utilized in conflict landscape, how the war is fought very practically. We're not starting from zero. Let's not forget that. International humanitarian principles and IHL is applicable across the board in any use of any weapon system. So it's not like we have absolutely no rules. But to concretize and then really articulate how these principles and laws exactly apply to those new weapon systems with a new technology such as AI is very, very important. So there are a lot of very concrete, very substantive discussions taking place in the conflict landscape and how AI is being utilized in how war is being fought. So we need to invest in those efforts.
So I want to just take the question maybe out of the AI for a bit on, like UN has been establishing these norms for a while, and with these different technologies and the weapons already it's been there, not just the AI. But there is this normative question, like how and why there is a need for peace and how the institutions are motivating them and justifying them. Iwan, like you've been working on this democracy and the trust issues in the Europe and post-Cold War era. How do you think that the current mediation or the peace-building efforts are being justified, or what kind of new motivations are we seeing compared to the previous era?
Thank you very much. First, to start with a footnote. Every good expert panel needs somebody who is a non-expert. on this panel, it's me. I don't know anything about AI and very little about dispute managing. So I'll start with the fact that this is where we're going to see a major change. And the major change is coming from the fact that the idea of a global order that was very much at the center of the post-Cold War period means that regardless that the fact that governments, when they try to be involved in mediation, have been applying very different kind of strategies, they should push for a kind of consistent justification. You should basically at least pretend that the way you are basically dealing with different conflicts is consistent in your foreign policy doctrine. In my view, this starts, fortunately or unfortunately, to shade away. You're going to see much more kind of a regional justification. You're going to see much more different conflicts being defined as very specific case. And this kind of a push for consistency is not going to be possible. Of course, it's going to be obligatory from international institutions like the United Nations, but when it comes to the nation states, they're not going to do it. Secondly, after the end of the Cold War, there was a very strong story about justice is a very important part of any peace effort. No peace without justice. And now we are moving to, let's have peace and think about justice later. So from this point of view, this is going to be a story which we're going to see how sustainable it is. But if you're going to see the justification of a different policies, you're not going to hear anymore this very important argument about justice. Democratization is a precondition for any stable political community, particularly, and this comes even from some of the Western countries, not necessarily European Union. I'm saying this because it is a major change. The third major change, in my view, which is happening is that we're interested normally what kind of new words are coming to the vocabulary. It's important to see what kind of words are disappearing. There was a word called nation building. Now nobody is doing nation building. In a certain way, dispute management and so on is very much about stopping a war, preventing the war. And this is, by the way, a possible trap, because as a famous military historian used to say, war is as old as the world, but peace is a modern invention. Peace is not simply the absence of war. And this is where it's interesting to see to what extent this stop the war strategy are going to be enough basically to be self-sustainable. And my last point is it was very important for the post-Cold War environment that you don't believe that also peace can be sustained in the absence of a functioning institutions. So now you have a much more story that let's start with the business approach first. And by the way, you should try anything. From this point of view, you can be much more open. I believe in different conflicts, different things are there. But the story is we cannot expect the institutions to start working. We go there, and I do believe we're going to see something that you can call a peace entrepreneurs. Basically, some businesses or country who go there and who say, we are there, we're investing in peace, we're going to change the environment, you're going to break a type of vicious circles that are keeping the wars. All this is good. At the same time, certain things that have been true in the 1990s probably are true still. And one is, when a major money are put just after the conflict ended, the result could be much more renewing the conflict than basically keeping it under control. So from this point of view, it's going to be my story is, when a paradigm changes, some of these changes come from the certain thing that happened in reality, and it was very fine, but this is the time to reread old books. Don't read the new one, reread it, because there are certain things which are going to remain valid.
Well, thank you very much. I don't think like this is not about an expertise, because the mediating actors needs to find a way to justify their position, and then their sort of theoretical position, not just the sort of institutional frameworks, but also the states. Maybe Galip, can you fill in here, like in terms of these competing narratives and the justifications are already on the way, and we are seeing these middle powers are taking these initiatives. When do you look at the mediation space, the peace building space in general, how does it shape the global order? Is it breaking the existing order? Are we seeing in sort of building up another order with these competing sort of initiatives.
Well, working now? Yes. Well, thank you very much, Abdullah, and thank you very much for putting together this great panel, and obviously with you as well, and also the tomorrow's workshop. I'm very much looking forward to it. I think the mediation field, the changing nature of the mediation field, is a great reflection of the changing nature of the global disorder. Because traditionally, I mean, recently, Farid Zakaria coined the term the democracy's post-referee age, in which the people loses trust in traditional institutions and in their legitimacy, effectiveness, or the traditional institutional mediators. I think what we are experiencing, and particularly with the rise of the middle powers and small powers mediation, we can see we are experiencing at the global level, the post-referee crisis, or the referee crisis at the global level, because traditionally there was certain institution or the countries that used to play much prominent role in this field. I mean, obviously the multilateral institution, traditionally the UN, or more at the regional level in Europe, the OICE, so the multilateral institution used to play much more role. I mean, I'm not saying that the multilateral institutions are not playing a role, they still do play an important role, but I think there is a relatively less emphasis on the multilateral institution when it comes to the mediation field. Less emphasis on UN. I mean, now at a time when the European and Russian tension is at its highest, the institution that was born precisely to manage this tension during the Cold War, the OICE, that was the product of the Helsinki Final Act, is almost nowhere to be seen in any meaningful way. So that's the first, I think this is the reflection of the decline of the multilateral institution as referee when it comes to management of the crisis and tension in the world. Secondly, again, the great powers used to enforce peace or mediate the peace or play this role. Now, with the great power competition, with the return of the power politics, their emphasis on the mediation, or such mediation is seen partly as a soft power politics, is becoming less pronounced. So they talk more about the power politics, the logic of the power politics. Obviously, we should not underestimate this. The obvious case in point is the U.S. enforcing the Gaza deal. Without the U.S. stepping in, probably this would not have happened. But relatively, you see a decline of also the previous great powers or superpowers playing a meaningful role in the mediation field. The third one was previously, obviously, the Northern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, that they used to be quite active in this field. They were like mediation superpowers. Recently, at Chatham House, we had an event which is entitled When Geneva Moves South. That means right now there are more Genevas, which was historically the city for mediation, facilitation, diplomatic activism in place like Doha, in place elsewhere. I think so. All these three levels tell us like the changing nature of the global order and how we see this in the mediation field. The fact that right now, I'm sure the Sheikh Nawaf will go into it in details. You have Qatar, which is from Colombia to Venezuela, between Venezuela and US, from Gaza to Pakistan and Afghanistan, from Rwanda to Congo, engages in such extensive mediation work is such a great example. Again, Turkey played a similar role in multiple fields between Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, the grain deal with the UN was one of the great example of this. So this change in the mediation field is very much reflective of the global restructuring. I think the final 2 points, one of them is, this is the contribution of small and middle powers into creating the global public good. Because always, usually the question is, yes, it's fine that we are talking about the rise of the middle powers becoming more active, but at the end of the day, who is going to provide global public goods? Who is going to provide the global public goods that will sustain any form of order? I think the mediation right now is a field where the small and middle powers are contributing to this global public good. And the final point is, The mediation is redefining, the changing nature of mediation and militarization in the world is redefining the geopolitical identity of the state. Now, like, recently I have been to several forums of that kind in Europe. Obviously, the panels that you start with is the European security, European defense, armament, militarization. Now, the panel that started this conversation here was the mediation in a fragmented world. And I think that's quite illustrative about when it comes to how this change in the mediation field are telling us about the geopolitical identity of the state, which countries are right now emphasizing hard power, which countries are emphasizing soft power, and that's quite illustrative of our time.
I'll get back to the question in the second round. Will this kind of moving Geneva South, is it going to lead to a regional or global order at the end without backing up by these great powers? But Sheikh Nawaf, maybe just connecting to the same discussion here, when you see these like sort of new initiatives, and you've been writing on these mediation space, from the first of all, do you see a Qatari model which is different than the existing frameworks? And how does it align with the other sort of these new initiatives that Ghalib was mentioning? And then why they are engaging it? Is this because of the disorder that Ghalib has been defining?
Well, first of all, Yasser, thank you for convening this panel with CSIS, Futures Lab. It's very timely. I think before I answer about Qatar, there's important understanding we have to have about how Qatar views the landscape of mediation. There's been, in my view, two major evolutions in the past few years that led to Qatar and other countries' success in their approach. A methodological evolution, which is focused on a multi-domain approach to mediation. Just like conflict has multi-domain warfare, there's also a multi-domain approach which focuses on both humanitarian, economic, narrative, and other aspects simultaneously in many cases. But also multi-partnerships at the same time. So more than one country dividing the multi-domain burden and burden sharing between them in achieving these mediation successes. The second would be a geographical evolution. We're seeing, as you rightfully mentioned, the South and middle powers now evolving in the mediation sphere, but also through initiating a lot of the mediation approach, augmenting what the institutional format, whether through the UN or through the great powers of this world, have formatted in the past. So augmenting what the UN may want, or what we could, in Qatar's case, support. So we've seen that approach changing in the methodology and also in the approach. But Qatar specifically, I think, was very successful in achieving those things by being agile, by being building on and utilizing its cachet of effectiveness and trustworthiness, something that Qatar has been cultivating for decades now. This is not a spur of the moment or a recent development. Qatar has been achieving successes in mediation for the good part of 2 decades at this point. But it's also ingrained quite uniquely for Qatar specifically, now bringing it even closer, ingrained in the Qatari constitution, the responsibility to mediate for the state, which is also something not only unique on the global scale, but also unique constitutionally in our part of the world. So all these elements and the main evolutionary changes that we've seen have given rise to Qatar and other nations that bring a unique capability, a niche capability that could couple their ability to negotiate, run humanitarian, look at societal issues, look at narrative challenges, almost simultaneously, while using that credibility, trustworthiness, and effectiveness cachet that they've built and brought to bear successfully.
So I see that our time has been going very fast, so that's why I need to get to Helena, which we try to capture in this panel is a wide range of not just the orders, but also like the sort of local initiatives as well. And Helena has been leading this initiative on peace building, where she sits at the intersect of technology and the sort of the digital conflict. Could you tell us, like, how do you think that this digitalization brought sort of to the conflict landscape, and how did it evolve, and how you guys are tackling?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on this panel. I think to bring it back to digitalization, digital technologies, is to pull on the string that the Undersecretary already spoke about, which is the impact of technology on cohesion, which I think is actually one of the reasons that we have the kind of global disorder, the changes to mediation that the previous speakers were speaking about. I think the current technological advances have basically lowered the barrier for information production, distribution, and dissemination. And that's fundamentally changed how we arrive at consensus, which is something which is critical to mediation. So many people worry about misinformation. That is absolutely a worry, but I think that is just a signal of a deeper issue, which is around the impact of technology on effective polarization. And just to quickly say what I mean by that, effective polarization is not to disagree about ideas, but it's to be in a position where you agree or disagree with someone because of who they are. And this is why, the fact that the way we consume information really has turbocharged effective polarization is also the reason why fact-checking and counter-speech often fall flat. When people are emotionally invested in a group identity, they're not just processing information when they consume it, but they're defending a sense of belonging. And that's how algorithms function, right? So the way that algorithms present information to us is they present content in order to capture attention. And so I think what we're seeing in our work is that the current information ecosystem really allows for information to be disseminated in ways that target digital subgroups. And that increases effective polarization. And that splinters any kind of broad societal consensus into subgroup consensuses. So it's not so much that the truth is being eroded, it's rather that it's being fragmented. And I think that fragmentation of consensus is sort of an essential component now of modern information warfare. So we're seeing this playing a role in Gaza, we're seeing this playing a role in Sudan, we're seeing it playing a role in Ukraine. So right now, my sense is that conflict is impacted primarily by algorithms and by algorithmic presentation of content, rather than by AI. We can talk about AI later, but I think the algorithms are what we should really be focusing about. That doesn't mean that nothing can be done about it. We've spoken a bit about this before, Yasser. In the interest of time, I'll just mention there is a lot of work in sort of defensive work. So many UN missions work on pre-bunking and on counter-speech. There's also work to mediate in the digital space. The Center for Humanitarian Dialogue does a lot of work on ensuring that there are codes of conduct about how we behave in digital space. And there can also be preventive work. That's the bulk of the work that we do at Build Up, where we sort of bring people into spaces where algorithms function differently. So we use bridge building algorithms to find consensus rather than to divide. So I think there are possible ways to use technology to sort of, work against this erosion of cohesion, but it is certainly a new challenge in the conflict ecosystem.
Okay, so in the second round, I think I want to give Ms. Uzumea like a chance to make sense of these like three arguments, and then with the Hellenist information warfare aspect. So we are seeing a lot of new initiatives, new order making for the peace in the mediation space. And the UN, how do you make sense within the UN with these new initiatives? Do you think those separate initiatives, separate motives could be aligned at the end in the future with the United Nations? Or United Nations is having some kind of challenges to sort of get together with different mediating actors? Yes.
Well, thank you. It's a tough question. I think I want to really highlight what Helena said. we really need to achieve much more in-depth understanding of how technology in general is impacting the conflict landscape. It's not just, hate speeches on the surface that is impacting the dynamics in a given country, but there is a fundamental shift affecting social cohesion. And as she said also, it's the algorithm. I mean, in the way in which AI is designed, the data is collected and then trained, etc. Algorithm is also designed. All these things actually have an enormous impact on the conflict landscape, and that really needs to be properly understood. Now, but I want to come back to a little bit more, a more pragmatic, practical impact of how we are introducing some of the AI tools in the peacemaking efforts. I mean, I would say three potential benefits of AI as a tool, and then alert 5 risk factors that we should really watch for. I think AI tools can, number one, enhance situational and contextual understanding for mediators. The second is, of course, widening participation. And then, of course, use AI as a supporting tool to make more informed and inclusive decision-making. And the UN is actually making a lot of practical examples on the ground. I mean, for example, in Yemen in 2020, the UN used AI tools to help facilitate digital dialogue so that more people can be included in the dialogues pursuing peace. Or in Uganda, UN has used AI tools to analyze public radio broadcast to understand really the public sentiments on various critical issues. It's not just the security issues per se, but how the perception is impacting the public is quite important. So, AI is a useful instrument, I'm sure, in the future in mediation efforts. But very quickly, 5 risk factors that we really need to watch for. Number one, AI tools are very vulnerable to exploitation. So we should not be looking at AI as a replacement to human expertise in a simple term. The second, of course, we need to watch out for oversimplification, the factual errors or biases that we often talk about, because mediation is really important to take care of the perceptions of fairness and impartiality, and this is number one important factor for mediators. The third is, of course, the data. Data in an evolving conflict context can be very quickly outdated, and it requires huge data as well. So we need to make sure that we understand the evolving context, very quickly evolving context of a conflict. So that's the third one. The fourth, considerable cultural sensitivity. Again, for mediators to really understand what kind of sensitivities are there in order to create or recreate, rebuild trust in the society and then rebuild social cohesion is a key factor. And this is not really a strength for AI models, the cultural sensitivities, so we need to look at that. The fifth one, it's an interesting issue to talk about perhaps, but we need to also make sure we understand the role of private sector in designing and making the AI instruments. And we need to make sure that existing vigilance is there to understand the potential corporate interest reflected in the technology and algorithm itself. And for mediators, this means being aware of how data, model design choices, etc., commercial incentives may shape the outcome of the advice that they get from the AI models. So that's very important. What does that mean? The principles of transparency and conflict sensitivity has to be always there. So the design and development of various AI instruments is absolutely critical. In conclusion, what that means is, I think it's a very general principle. We need to treat artificial intelligence and the technology in general as an instrument to support us. We use those instruments and tools rather than being dictated by them. So I think that is the important principle in going into the AI era. How humans retain overall oversight in various processes, whether that is mediation, prevention, or how the military operations are conducted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nawaf, Sheikh Nawaf, could you talk us through what Ms. Izumi has been listing in terms of the potential use of AI in the space? You think as a Qatari mediation perspective, those newer initiatives, are they aligning themselves with the UN? Are they using these tools in the same perspective? Are they going to be, the way that these tools are going to be deployed and the way that they are being understood as a challenge, is it aligned with the UN perspective in general?
Well, I believe they are aligned, but they're also unique in their effects, because even us here at the Doha Forum, when we look at the effects of, for instance, narrative warfare and narrative intelligence, if you follow the internet, you'll see wild ideas about what's going on here at the Sheraton, which is absolutely absurd, of course, but that just gives you a taste of how narratives are wielded in this new digital age. And the question of digitalization, digitation, and digital transformation, and those differences are all interesting. But when it comes to the practical use of AI, I see that, for instance, the challenges that Qatar had with the narrative warfare that tried to hinder Qatar's success in supporting a successful mediation between Hamas, for instance, and Israel, as just an example, is where AI could help in three ways. One is the predictive nature of AI technologies. So giving an early warning approach to what is the challenges behind the bend. What are the next diplomatic breakdown of humanitarian issues on the ground? What are the escalations that may be driven by narrative issues from populations that may drive governments of those mediating parties, negotiating parties, to change course abruptly? That foresight, technological foresight, that predictive analysis and behavioral studies, while keeping all the safeguards in place, obviously, could be the first tool to be used by mediators. The second tool, I believe, is looking at specifically understanding the narrative intelligence and understanding populations' mindsets. Where are the pitfalls? What are the algorithmic generated campaigns against a certain mediation that those mediators could identify and mitigate and deal with immediately, instead of dealing with it after it kind of takes off. The third will be inclusiveness. I think if you look at a lot of the new AI models that develop natural conversational translation, it will bring in more minorities into the mediation sphere, have more voices heard from women, from the youth, and from different nations who may not have the access, whether through linguistical barriers, technological, communicational barriers. AI could be a supporting element in getting those voices literally heard by mediators and all parties, including institutional organizations like the UN and its subsidiary organizations. Those elements, I think, where you look at artificial intelligence while understanding that these models have to be bespoke, that these foundational models and those agents that we build those models on should have those safeguards, and that agency should always be with the mediator, the human, and not given to the artificial intelligence or the platform.
Thank you very much. So we have limited time, so we will try to be very quick in this final part. Galip, can you like when you heard from these like UN perspective and the Qatari perspective, and your discussion on the new sort of the global disorder and the new initiatives, and with this sort of use of AI in these mediation or the sort of conflict prevention mechanisms, do you see any opportunity for a new order making with these new mediating actors, or how do you see that?
Well, I think we are far from any sort of an order, and I think we should take it for granted. I mean, all these mediation efforts that we are seeing that being quite extensive is not creating a new order. This is managing the disorder for a long time. So this order is not a transitional phase. I think it's not like, right now an aberration. For a long time, this is the picture. And we have to adapt to this. So this is managing the disorder. Secondly, I think this is, as I mentioned in the first round, the small and middle powers' contribution to the global public good. I mean, just one example. The grain deal, the mediation of the grain deal between by the Turkey and the UN, between Ukraine and Russia, is not only about reduction of the tension in Black Sea. The 30% of the global grains trade is being conducted through the Black Sea. That means also an initiative to reduce the food insecurity in Africa, in Sahel, in Middle East, in elsewhere. So this is a great service for the global public good, because 30% of the grains trade is being conducted through the Black Sea. Therefore, like this grain deal initiatives that was negotiated, mediated by Turkey and the UN, was a contribution to the global public good. The other things is a call for, in a sense, more cooperative, more cooperation at the mediation field, because the single country mediation is becoming more and more challenging. The burden of mediation is increasing, but the knowledge, the expertise that mediation is requiring for today's challenge are increasing. And I think that's a call for more cooperation between, like, UN, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, or Egypt, or any other mediators, or Norway, Sweden, for several reasons. One of them is to reduce the burden of mediation, the cost of mediation. The clearest example of this when Qatar was attacked for its role in the mediation between Hamas and Israel. So a mediator attacked. So one of the simple questions is, how can you ensure the security of the mediators when they engage in the mediation? Secondly, I think the major question is to combine the expertise, to combine the approaches, because the new mediators are bringing their own tools, their own approaches than the Europeans, etc. I think we need like more engagement between the individual countries and multilateral institutions, but between the European, Middle Eastern, or Global South, whatever term we call it. So the mediators should be across the border with multiple countries rather than single countries.
Ivan, very quickly, how do you think like this sort of disorder and this sort of fragmented motivations, how should the mediators, even from the local to the like sort of state level, should motivate themselves, should adapt to this reality?
I do believe that basically to go into these disputes and to mediate, you should have a talent for being disappointed. Because normally the patience is one of the most important things in all these efforts. But there is one thing which is related to the AI, which in my view is important. Local knowledge is one of the most important things for any type of successful mediation. And local knowledge quite often is not about knowing languages, but about knowing dialects and slang. From this point of view, AI can create also the illusion of a knowledge which is not going to be enough. And this is particularly when you go to small places, where you go to small languages. And from this point of view, I do believe that the most important for the motivation for the players is to know that probably you very easily succeed to stop a fighting, but if you don't want really to end a war, you should stay there committed for a longer time.
Thank you very much. For the final part, Helena, could you walk us through what do you expect in the future? We didn't get much into the AI space. What kind of risks you're expecting?
I think I have to say something about the capabilities in order to say something about the risks. So we've talked about how right now AI is being used for sense making, whether it's through social media or media listening, whether it's through digital dialogues that the UN so skillfully runs. I think what's on the horizon is two things. One is a greater understanding of complex systems, so leaning into this early warning thing through things such as digital twins, AI agents that can accompany mediators in their decision making, so essentially how to interact with very complex data sets to model out what could be the outcomes of a negotiation process or of a conflict. I think the second aspect is sort of trying to explore the positions of different parties as part of that. So that can be either through interacting with agents that bring to the table representatives that can't be there otherwise. The UN did an experiment with that called Talk to Abdallah. So that's one possibility. But also interact with difficult questions. So using AI agents as a place where conflict parties can update their beliefs by asking questions they don't want to ask in person. But I do want to say something about the sort of the focus of where we should think about the dangers of this, and I think it's related to the previous comment on this illusion of knowledge. I think that the challenge we have with AI is that it changes how we consume information. AI is being positioned as an epistemic technology, so as something that is creating knowledge, but it doesn't create knowledge, it delivers predictions, and that's quite different. And so I think if we misunderstand probabilistic interpretations of the truth, then it becomes too easy to make decisions. We think we hold the truth when all we have is a probability. And so I think this is really important when we think about how we're responding to AI-enabled sense-making. We don't have the truth. If we think we have the truth, we get stuck in positions. If we think we're stuck in a position, we can no longer deliberate. For me, that is the greatest challenge to AI. I know you're very short on time, so if you need me to stop, just tell me. Otherwise, I can say one more thing.
Before they kick us out from this room, we can maybe ask the audience if they want to ask this wide range of experts if they have any questions. Otherwise, I would like to give one final minute to you to finish up. If there is any questions, I see one behind and then one front, and then we can finalize the session. I think you are. Sorry. No time? No, Max. Okay, so you can just shout out.
One, two, yes, you may hear me. Thank you much. So we might continue that in this time of global transformations and especially the cruciality of mediation for resolving different geopolitical issues as well as other world conflicts. How do you think these systems could be constructed and the provability of information established maybe should we consider the implementation of other technologies as blockchain and some other distributed ledgers algorithms in order to provide as more clear and qualitative information which can be available? Thank you.
I think we don't have much time. Helena, can you take this question to... they got your... And then, yeah.
Okay, there we go, and it's back. I think that's an interesting question. So can we use blockchain and distributed ledgers as a way of having a better generation of qualitative data. I mean, I think in general, I don't want to go straight into blockchain because I think that's quite specific, but in general, the future of the kind of AI support that I think mediation teams can expect does have to go through at least small language models, so not large language models, things that are benchmarked for a specific purpose, that come from a specific data set. This links a lot to the points on bias, on where data is coming from, the need to update data, also to the work that you're doing at the Futures Lab. So that's a more generic answer, not addressing specifically the blockchain point, but I think that's the direction of travel in terms of the kind of support mediators should call for, and the kind of design that will be more conflict sensitive, I think.
I don't think we can get into much more details because me and Eunice was agreed on the time. Thank you very much for listening this amazing panel and panelists. And yes, thank you very much for coming.